My mother slid a cashier's check for $1 million across the kitchen table, and it wasn't for me. It stopped next to the mashed potatoes, in front of my sister Madison, and the whole room started clapping. My aunt cried. My father studied his fork. I remember the smell of pot roast and the sound of my sister's bracelets as she pressed the check to her chest like a newborn. Nobody looked at me. I was 29 years old, and I had kept that family's books for 7 years, and I sat there doing what I always did, the quiet math nobody asked for. 2 weeks later, that same mother told me to pack my life into boxes. And here's the thing you should know before we start. Being told to leave wasn't the worst thing my family ever did to me. It wasn't even close. 5 years later, they would come for the thing I built with my own 2 hands, and they would use my own name to do it. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where women who got counted out sit you down and tell you what happened next. I'm glad you're here. If a story like this one has ever sat at your kitchen table, drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe because you're going to want to hear how this ends. The dinner had a theme, and the theme was Madison. My mother, Carol, stood up and tapped her glass with a spoon like we were at a wedding. She announced that the family was making an investment. $1 million, she said, for Madison's dream. A wedding venue and lifestyle brand called the Magnolia House, the kind of place brides drive 2 hours to tour. Madison did her pageant cry, the pretty one, the one that never touches her mascara. My Aunt Lorraine clapped until her rings clicked. My father, Frank, nodded at his plate. I sat at the far end where I always sat, and I did the thing that got me in trouble my whole life. I asked a question. What's the projected overhead for the first year? That was all. Asked politely, by the person who had filed this family's taxes since she was 22. The clapping stopped. Madison's smile went flat like a phone screen. My aunt looked at me the way you look at a spill. My mother set down her spoon, slow and deliberate, and said we could talk about the boring parts later, and everyone laughed the way people laugh when they're relieved someone else got stepped on. I want to be fair here. I wasn't jealous of the check. I've had years to search myself on that. And it's true. The money frightened me more than it stung me, because I knew what our family actually had, and I knew what selling everything to fund a dream costs when the dream doesn't pay rent. But my mother watched me over the rim of her glasses for the rest of that meal. Not angry. Appraising. Like a woman doing inventory, deciding which items had stopped earning their shelf. 2 days later, she called me into her study. My mother's study was really the store's back office moved into the house. A desk, a filing wall, and a notary stamp she'd carried for 20 years, sitting in its cradle like a little crown. She didn't ask me to sit. She told me the house was restructuring. Madison would need the space, the quiet, and the family's full attention while she built the Magnolia House. Then she said the part I can still hear at 2 a.m. You're 29, Mira. You have no husband, no plan, and no spark. Every dollar we have is going where things grow. I said I'd been running the store's books without a paycheck for 7 years. She looked genuinely puzzled, like I'd brought up the weather. That was your room and board, she said. This family invests. It doesn't do charity. I asked her where I was supposed to go. She straightened a stack of papers, tapped them twice on the desk, and gave me my answer. That's the first interesting question you've asked in years. You have 2 weeks. You're just wasting space here. Then, softer, almost kind, which made it worse. You don't water rocks, Mira. I stood there and felt the sentence go in clean, the way sharp things do. You don't bleed right away. I nodded, because I'm the kind of person who nods, and I walked out past the filing wall with my name in its folders. My W-2s, my license copy, my whole paper life in her cabinets. Here's what I didn't understand yet. Standing in that hallway. I thought she was cutting me out of the family. She wasn't. She was writing me down. And there's a difference between the two that would cost me almost everything, 5 years down the road, in a bank envelope with my name on it. The check bothered me for a simpler reason than pride. Math. My parents owned a hardware store in Harlow, Georgia. Hardware stores don't have $1 million lying around. That night, I went down for water and the study light was still on. Door open. Papers fanned out on the desk. I wasn't snooping. I was raised to read what's in front of me. That was literally my job. On top of the stack, a closing statement from a land sale. 62 acres off Route 19. My grandmother Ruth's farm, sold to a developer out of Atlanta for $1.1 million after taxes. I stood there with my glass sweating in my hand. Grandma Ruth had died 2 years before. Quick, a stroke in her garden with her gloves still on. And I could hear her voice like she was in the room because she'd said it to us. To both of us. Me and Madison. The summer I turned 25, standing in the bean rows. When I'm gone, this dirt splits 2 ways. You hear me? 2 granddaughters, 2 halves. She never changed the will in time. Everything went to my mother, legal and tidy, and the law doesn't care what got said in a bean row. So there it was, in 10-point font. The $1 million wasn't a gift my parents were giving Madison. It was a thing being taken, half of it, the half that was supposed to be a promise, and handed over at a dinner with clapping. I put the glass down and went back upstairs and lay on my bed in a room that had 2 weeks left in it. And a question opened up in me, cold and specific, the kind that doesn't close on its own. If they took that so easily, what else had they already taken? It turns out you can fit 29 years into 11 boxes. Books in 4, clothes in 3, and 1 box that was just paper. My certificates, my community college transcript, the store ledgers I'd copied for my own records because old habits are load-bearing. At the bottom of my desk drawer, I found a postcard from Grandma Ruth, mailed from a church trip to Savannah the year before she died. A picture of live oaks on the front. On the back, in her stubby pencil, 2 lines. Saw a palm tree growing out of a seawall today. Grow anyway. R. I sat on the floor of my emptying room and held that postcard for a long time. Madison appeared in my doorway on my last night, leaned on the frame with a glass of wine, and watched me tape boxes. "Don't make it weird, Mimi," she said. "It's not personal. Mom just believes in me." I asked her if she'd read the contractor bids for her venue yet. She rolled her eyes and said I sounded like an accountant. I said I was an accountant. She laughed, and for 1 second it was almost us again, 10 and 13, before the pageants. Then she drifted off down the hall to her room, which was about to become 2 rooms, one of them mine. My father passed my door twice that night. Heavy socks on old pine. I knew his walk the way you know weather. Both times he slowed. Both times he kept going. I want to tell you he came in and said something a father says. He didn't. He left a $100 bill folded under my windshield wiper instead. No note. I kept the postcard in my glove box for 5 years. I still know both lines by heart. My last day at Stone Family Hardware, I trained my own replacement, a bookkeeping service out of Macon that cost more per month than I'd cost per year. I handed over passwords, walked the shelves one last time, and then, because paper is how I say important things, I brought my mother a single typed page. A request to be removed as a member of Stone Family Holdings, LLC. You should know about that company. When I was 22, my parents formed a little holding entity for the store and the building. For tax purposes, my mother said, and put my name on it as a 20% member. I signed where the tab said sign. I never got a distribution, never had a vote that counted, and mostly forgot it existed. The way you forget a spare key you gave someone in better times. But leaving town flipped a switch in me. I wanted my name back. All of it. My mother took my typed page, set it under her stapler without reading it, and smiled at a customer over my shoulder. "Paperwork later, Mira. We're busy building something if you haven't noticed." I said I'd noticed. She was already walking away. I stood at the counter I'd worked since high school and rang up my last customer, Mr. Pruitt, 3 feet of chain and a padlock. And I remember thinking the register drawer sounded different when you know you'll never open it again. Lighter, cheaper. On my way out, my mother called across the store, bright as a bell for the whole town to hear. Drive safe, sweetheart. The performance of a loving family. Always, for any audience. The stapler still had my page under it when the door swung shut. Remember that page. It matters more than anything else in this story. The first night of my new life, I sat on a motel bed outside Valdosta and did what I do. I made a ledger. Assets, $2,300 in checking, a Honda with 140,000 miles on it, 11 boxes, 1 postcard. Liabilities, none, which is a strange kind of rich. Skills, bookkeeping, payroll, quarterly taxes, and the ability to be invisible in a room, which I was about to learn had market value. I wrote it all on motel stationery with a pen that skipped, and at the top of the page I wrote, Page 1. Don't let anyone tell you rock bottom is dramatic. It's mostly administrative. The next morning, I spread a map on the hood of the Honda and thought about where a woman with a head for numbers and no references goes. Cities want degrees. Small towns want history. But the coast wants hands. Fishing seasons, tourist seasons, charter boats, rental cottages. Every one of them a little business drowning in receipts, run by people too busy working to do paperwork. 3 hours south, on the Florida line of the Gulf, there's a town called Cedar Point. I'd been there once at 19, on the only vacation my family ever took that wasn't a pageant. I remembered the smell of diesel and salt and fried mullet, and a marina full of men yelling about invoices. I put my finger on it. My grandmother grew tomatoes in dirt the county map called unbuildable. Grow anyway. I checked out at 6 a.m., bought gas and a banana, and drove south with most of what I owned sliding around behind me at every stoplight. It sounded like my whole life rearranging itself. I decided to take that as a good sign. Before I could open a new checking account in Cedar Point, I had to close out my old paper trail, and that's when the floor gave a little. I called the bank in Harlow about a certificate of deposit my grandmother had started for me when I was born. My college fund, the one I'd been told wasn't performing when I asked about it at 19, the year I swapped university brochures for community college at night. The teller was young and helpful, and had no idea what she was handing me. The CD had been cashed out, she said. $18,000, withdrawn in full. A decade ago, when I was 19. Authorized signature on file. Carol Stone, custodian. I stood in a gas station parking lot with the phone against my ear and asked her to read the date again. She did. It matched the spring Madison turned 22, the spring of Madison's first business, an online boutique that lived 11 months and died owing money. The spring my mother sat me down and explained, with great patience, that college debt would eat me alive, and wasn't it lucky I was good at numbers without the piece of paper. I had asked about that account back then. I want you to know I asked. I was told there had been a bookkeeping error, and then I was told I was being disrespectful, and in my family the second thing ends the conversation. A decade. This didn't start with a check on a table 2 weeks ago. It started when I was a teenager, and it had a signature on it, and the signature was my mother's. I thanked the teller because I'm polite even when the ground moves, and I hung up and wrote one line in my new ledger. Find everything with my name on it. Here's what I did that week, and I'm going to be specific, because it matters later. I froze my credit with all 3 bureaus. I closed every account with my name alone on it, and opened new ones in Cedar Point. I found one old joint checking account from my college years with my mother's name still on it. The bank told me closing it required both signatures. I mailed her the form with a stamped return envelope. It never came back. Fine. I emptied it to $4 and moved on, because you protect what you can reach, and you document what you can't. Then I sat in the Cedar Point Library and typed a formal letter to Stone Family Holdings, LLC, requesting removal as a member, and I sent it certified mail, return receipt requested. 9 days later, the green receipt card came back, signed by my mother in her tidy notary hand. I put it in a folder. I know how this sounds. Who mails certified letters to their own mother? A woman who grew up watching that mother keep every receipt from every vendor who ever crossed her. That's who. Carol Stone taught me one true thing without meaning to. Paper is the only witness that doesn't change its story at Sunday dinner. But when I stopped by a Harlow Bank branch on my one trip back for the rest of my boxes, the teller squinted at her screen and said something that itched for years. "Ma'am, you're still listed as a member of Stone Family Holdings." Still listed. My letter had been received, signed for, and shelved. The same place as the page under the stapler. An LLC, it turns out, is not like a family. You can't be thrown out of one just because somebody stops loving you. You have to be released. And they never, ever released me. Cedar Point does not care about your last name, which is the nicest thing a town has ever done for me. I got a job cleaning offices at night. A dentist, a realtor, an insurance man. 6 to midnight, paid in checks that never bounced. Days I answered phones for a charter captain with a filing system he described as the truck. I ate a lot of rice. I learned that the smell of other people's coffee at 11 p.m. is its own kind of loneliness, and that you can be too tired to be sad, which is not a cure, but works like one. On the community board at the laundromat, between a lost cat and a boat motor, there was a flyer. QuickBooks certification course, 12 weeks, Tuesday and Thursday nights, County Extension Office, $400. I had $460 that month. I stood in front of that flyer with my clothes going around behind me and did the math 3 times, like it was going to change. My mother's voice did its usual commentary in my skull. No plan, no spark. Rocks don't get watered. I took the tab with the phone number anyway. Actually, I took the whole flyer. If I was going to bet my last dollar on somebody, it might as well be the one person who'd never once dropped me. Sometimes courage is loud. Mine was a personal check for $400, written on a washing machine, with a hand that only shook a little. The instructor took one look at my sample ledgers the first night and asked where I'd studied. "My mother's back office," I said. She laughed. She thought it was a joke. It was the most expensive education in this story, and I hadn't even gotten the bill yet. 14 months after I left, my Aunt Lorraine forwarded me a link with a row of exclamation points. Local news, Harlow, area family breaks ground on $1 million wedding venue. There was Madison in a white hard hat that had never met dirt, gold shovel in her hands. There was my father at the edge of the frame, looking at the ground he'd just bet on. And there was my mother, front and center, quoted like scripture. "We're a family that invests in winners," Carol Stone said. The reporter asked if it was true a local hardware family had committed their entire legacy to the project. My mother smiled that ribbon-cutting smile. "Everything we have goes where things grow." Standing in my rented room with the phone glowing in the dark, I felt the old reflex twitch. Call, warn, run the overhead numbers one more time, be useful, be seen being useful. I looked at that reflex like a lab specimen, and then I did the healthiest arithmetic of my life. I blocked my mother's number. I blocked Madison's. My father didn't have a cell phone, so he got grandfathered into the silence. Aunt Lorraine I kept, set to mute. Every family needs one unsecured channel, and hers had the best gossip anyway. Then I turned off the phone and stood at the window listening to a shrimp boat idle out of the channel in the dark. Peace, when it finally comes, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like a house after the guests leave. Quiet, and a little too big, and entirely, finally yours. It would be 4 years before I heard my mother's voice again. When I did, she was crying like her heart was broken, and it still wasn't an apology. I passed the certification in March and hung my shingle the same week, if you can call a magnetic sign on a Honda a shingle. Tidewater Ledger Company. My first client was Gus Tremont, who owns the marina at the end of Water Street. 68 years old, forearms like dock pilings, a man who once fixed a bilge pump with a spoon. His filing system was a shoebox that said New Balance on the side and taxes in marker over that. He dumped it on the counter between us and said, "The government says I owe $11,000. I say they're drunk. Settle it." It took me 9 days. Underneath the diesel receipts and a sandwich I do not wish to discuss, Gus had 3 years of missed fuel tax credits, unclaimed depreciation on 2 lifts, and a quarterly penalty that existed only because his old preparer had filed late. When the dust settled, he owed nothing and got $9,000 back. Gus looked at the amended returns for a long time. Then he looked at my invoice, which I'd written small because I was scared of him, and said the thing that built my business. "This number's wrong. You charge too little. Fix that, or I'll tell everyone you're cheap instead of good." He paid me double what I asked and told the whole dock anyway. Within a month, I had the bait shop, the ice house, and 2 charter captains, all shoebox men, all allergic to paperwork, all suddenly telling each other about the quiet girl who fights the government with a calculator. I drove home that first night with real money in an account nobody could sign but me, and I sat in the car in the dark and laughed until my ribs hurt. No spark. Sure, Mom. No spark at all. By the end of that first year, I had 9 clients and an office that was technically a Honda. I did payroll in the passenger seat, met clients at the diner, and kept every record in waterproof totes because I'd learned what the coast does to paper. Meanwhile, news from Harlow arrived the way it always did, through my cousin Jenna, Aunt Lorraine's daughter, who texts like a police scanner. Jenna is married to Deke, who does drywall, and Deke had bid on the Magnolia House build. That gave Jenna a sightline into my sister's dream that no magazine spread would survive. "Maddie fired the second contractor," one text said. "Says he didn't understand the vision." Then, "The vision is Italian marble, in a barn, in Harlow." Then, "They flew in a lighting designer from Nashville, for the chicken coop. It's a bridal suite now, but Mira, it was the chicken coop." I read those texts standing in line at the fish house and felt 2 things at once, and I'll be honest about both. The first was the cold, professional dread you feel watching someone drive a truck toward a bridge that's out. I knew what 62 acres of my grandmother's dirt had turned into, and I knew burn rates, and the math had a smell to it. The second thing was smaller and uglier and human, and it lived somewhere under my ribs. They chose this. Over me. Marble for the chicken coop. I didn't answer most of Jenna's texts that year, but I never once asked her to stop sending them, and you can decide for yourself what that says about me. In December, she sent a photo of the venue's new sign, gold letters on whiteboard, and underneath it, "Guess what the loan payment is?" I didn't guess. Some numbers you don't want in your head. Year 2, I rented my first real office. 1 room above Hutto's Bait and Tackle, with a window unit that spat, and a view of the shrimp fleet. Best worst office in Florida. The day I moved in, my mail forwarded over from the old rental, and in the stack, between a fishing catalog and a light bill, was an envelope that made my hands go still. A Schedule K1, Stone Family Holdings Al LLC. Tax year just ended member. Mira Stone, 20%. 0 distributions, of course. I never saw a dime of anything. But there was my name, still riding along in their tax filings like a passenger they'd forgotten in the back seat. Except you don't forget a passenger for 2 years. You keep her because she's useful. I sat down at my new desk and wrote my second certified letter, cooler than the first, with phrases I'd picked up from a legal handbook at the library. Formal demand, membership withdrawal. Please confirm in writing within 30 days. I mailed it to my mother as registered agent, and 11 days later the whole envelope came back stamped, refused. Refused. Not unclaimed, not undeliverable. She had looked at my name on that envelope, at a post office counter, in front of a clerk, and said no. I want you to sit with the strangeness of that. This is a woman who told the entire town I'd abandoned my family. Cried about it at church, according to Jenna. And when my actual name arrived at her actual door, asking to be let go, she pushed it back across the counter like a bad check. "You can't be released, I told you." I filed the refused envelope next to the green receipt card, label out, where I could see it. My folder was getting thicker. I hated how ready I was. That spring, I landed the account that changed my weight class, the Harbor Group, 4 restaurants under one stubborn owner named Rosa DeLuca, 12 sets of books between the restaurants, the food truck, and the catering arm. All of it tangled like trot lines. Their old firm in Tallahassee had been billing them blind and returning calls never. Rosa interviewed me at a back table with a toddler on her hip and asked why she should trust somebody who worked over a bait shop. I said, "Because I answer my phone, and because I'll find the money your last guy was too bored to look for." I found it in 6 weeks. A misclassified equipment lease and 2 years of tip credit errors, worth more than my fee for the whole year. Rosa didn't say thank you. She did something better. She called 3 friends. Here's the lesson Gus had beaten into me by then, the one I pass along to every woman starting over at 30 plus with a skill in her hands. Charge like you plan to be here in 10 years. The first number I quoted Rosa made my own throat tighten. She didn't blink. Nobody ever blinks. The only person who ever thought I was worth nothing got me for free for 7 years, and I've stopped finding that a coincidence. By June, I had a waiting list, and I did something radical for a stone. I turned down work. Politely, with referrals, like a business that respects its own hours. The night I turned down my first client, Jenna texted again, a screenshot this time, from the Magnolia House's public page. Sunset, string lights, Madison radiant in white linen, arms spread wide under the beams. Caption, fully booked for the season. Jenna's one-line commentary underneath is still the best piece of financial analysis I've ever read. Booked ain't paid. The glossy article came out that summer. A regional lifestyle magazine. 6 pages. The Magnolia Miracle. How one Georgia family bet it all on a dream. I read it standing at my P.O. box. The photos were genuinely beautiful. Whatever else my sister is, she can style a room. There was the wraparound porch. There was the reclaimed oak bar. There was my mother in a straw hat, laughing in soft focus, captioned as Matriarch and Chief Believer. The article said bookings were strong and the family was already dreaming bigger. What the article didn't have was a single number, and I read financial journalism the way other people read horoscopes. I notice what's missing. 2 days later, Jenna supplied the missing numbers in her own format. A photo of Deke at their kitchen table, holding an invoice, deadpan as a mugshot. Drywall, second building, 90 days past due. He's called 4 times. They put him on a payment plan, Mira. A payment plan. For 11 grand. Then the kicker. Also, the fall gala got postponed for weather. It has not rained in 3 weeks. I put my phone away and looked out at the boats, and did the quiet math nobody asked for, because apparently, that's just the shape of my soul. Strong bookings, unpaid subs, a postponed fundraiser, for a business that opened with $1 million in the tank and shouldn't need to fundraise at all. Under all that string lighting, something was already eating itself. I'd like to tell you, I felt sorry. Mostly what I felt was the specific vertigo of watching your childhood repeat its scale, appearances paid in full, the help put on a payment plan. My family had always run that way. The only difference now was the size of the invoice, and whose porch it would eventually land on. In October, my phone buzzed with a group text. Me and what looked like every contact my mother had ever collected, 200 numbers wide. I hadn't heard from her in 3 years, but there I was on the blast list, right between the pharmacy and the pastor. You're invited to an evening under the magnolias, a fundraising gala celebrating our first amazing year. $500 per plate, tables of 8 available, family discount available. I read it 4 times. The audacity had layers, like a wedding cake. She'd blocked my certified letter with her own hands, told the town I was an ingrate, and kept me on the marketing list, because a contact is an asset, and Carol Stone has never once deleted an asset. And the family discount. For me, presumably, $500 minus the going rate for wasting space. I typed and deleted a dozen replies, each one a small courtroom. Then I sent the one that took no prisoners precisely because it had no blood in it. No. Just that. No punctuation drama from the person who used to write 3 paragraphs of apology for missing Sunday dinner. Jenna called me within the hour, cackling. She'd gotten the same invite. Then her voice dropped into its serious register, the scanner switching channels. "You know what the gala's actually for, right?" Deke heard it from the caterer, who heard it from the bank. I said fundraisers are what businesses hold when the word loan has stopped working. Jenna was quiet a second. "It's worse than that," she said. "There's already a second loan, a big one. And Mira, the caterer said your mama had to promise the bank all kinds of things to get it. I didn't know it yet, but one of the things she promised was me. Before I tell you what my mother actually promised that bank, if your family ever made you pay for a seat at their own table, tell me about it in the comments. I read every one. And take a second to subscribe, because the envelope that shows up later in this story changed the price of everything I'd built. You'll want to be here when it's opened." Hurricane Odette came ashore that September 40 miles east of us, which on the Gulf counts as a near miss and still puts 4 inches of bay water in your office. I got the warning at noon and did the only triage that mattered. Client records first. I hauled totes down the stairs of the bait shop for 3 hours, loaded my truck to the headliner. I'd upgraded from the Honda by then, out of profit, thank you, and drove it all to a storage unit on high ground while the sky turned the color of a bruise. My own furniture I left to swim. Desks are replaceable. A shrimper's 4 years of fuel logs are not. Afterward, Cedar Point did what small coastal towns do. Chainsaws by dawn, casseroles by noon. And I found my own way to show up. FEMA aid applications and insurance claims are paperwork, and paperwork is my country. I set up a folding table outside the Baptist church with a hand-lettered sign, "Free help with storm forms." And for 2 weeks I filled out claims for shrimpers and motel owners, and a one-armed roofer named Cecil, who hugged me so hard my back cracked. I didn't plan it as marketing. I need you to believe that, because what happened next embarrassed me for a year. When the water went down, 15 new clients walked up my stairs, some still smelling of bleach, every one of them saying a version of the same sentence. "You showed up when it was free, so I trust you now that it costs." My mother taught me love is an investment that expects a return. Cedar Point taught me the opposite math. You give first, open-handed, and somehow the books balance anyway. Also, and this mattered more than I knew, the storm had knocked one particular house on the dune line halfway to its knees. The Kessler house sat at the end of Gullwing Lane, up on the primary dune with its shoulders square to the Gulf. 2 stories of gray cedar shake, built in 1961 by a boat captain who apparently framed it like he framed hulls. I'd walked past it every evening for 2 years. It was the house I nodded to. Odette took its roof deck, blew out the seaward windows and drowned its wiring, and the out-of-state heirs who'd been letting it rot finally quit on it entirely. It went on the county auction list that winter. As is, cash, no contingencies. I found the listing on a Tuesday night and sat with my laptop glowing in the dark like a fire. Here's what I had. $73,000 saved, dollar by dollar, 3 years of rice dinners and refused vacations. Here's what the flippers would see. A tear-down lot with a Gulf view. Here's what I saw. Sound framing, a survey that said the dune held, and math at midnight on the back of a deposit slip. Auction cap, rewire, roof, windows, 18 months of sweat spread across weekends I technically didn't have. I called Gus at 7 a.m. because he'd know the bones. He walked it with me that weekend, kicked a piling like he was buying a mule, pried open a crawl space and stood quiet for a long time under the floor joists. "Captain built," he finally said. "They don't make wood like this anymore, and the storm knew it. Buy the house, Mira." I said the smart move was probably a duplex in town. Gus looked at me the way he looks at a wrong number. "You've been nodding at this house for 2 years. I've seen you. Go get your dirt." Auction was the 3rd Thursday in January. The auction happened on the courthouse steps, which sounds romantic and is actually just cold. 11 of us, breath steaming, a clerk with a clipboard reading legal descriptions like scripture. When the Kessler parcel came up, it got quiet. And then it was me and one other bidder, a flipper in a golf vest who bid with his chin. 48, 52, 55. He chinned 59 at me with the bored confidence of other people's money, and I heard my own voice come out flat and final, a register voice, a voice that has counted what it has and knows the number cold. 61.5. He checked his phone. Whatever margin spreadsheet lived in there said no. The gavel, a literal gavel, Cedar Point does not upgrade, came down. And a broken house on a dune belonged to a woman who'd arrived in this town 3 years earlier with 11 boxes and a skipping pen. My hands shook so hard signing the paperwork that the clerk kindly pretended not to notice. That afternoon, I drove to Gullwing Lane with the old brass key the estate had mailed the county. It didn't turn. 60 years of salt in the lock, and the key just spun my hope around and gave it back. So I did what you do. I dragged a crate under the east window, knocked the plywood loose, and climbed in through the window of my own house. And that was still the easiest door my family ever gave me. I sat down right there on the gritty floor in the smell of salt and old wood and bird, with sunset coming through the empty window frames in stripes, and I held that useless brass key until it went warm in my fist. Remember this house. Remember this key. Because everything my family does for the rest of this story, they do because of what this house became. And what it proved. The renovation ran on weekends and stubbornness. I learned to sister joists from a video and a retired framer named Hollis who charged in fish sandwiches. Rewire I paid for properly. Water and fire are where pride goes to die. Month by month the house came back. Roof, windows, a porch you could trust. And while it did, the firm grew past what one woman in an office over a bait shop could hold. So I hired Danny Marsh, 19, community college, a girl who talked to spreadsheets easier than to people and flinched when praised, which told me plenty about her house before she ever said a word about it. First week, she found a duplicated vendor payment 3 clients back that I had missed. I praised her in specifics, watched the flinch, and kept doing it anyway. On schedule, like physical therapy. You break the cycle in small reps, or you don't break it at all. Meanwhile, buying a house at county auction turns out to come with homework. Quiet title. My closing attorney's office ran the standard searches on me as buyer. Liens, judgments, entities. The boring proctology of American paperwork. I signed the authorization without a second thought. I had a clean freeze on my credit. Clean accounts. 5 years of dots connected and documented. I was, on paper, the most boring woman in Florida, and proud of it. The title clerk said the report would take 2 weeks. It took 9 days, and then she called me at the office at 4 p.m. on a Thursday, and her voice had that trying to sound casual sound that paperwork people get exactly when things are not casual. Ms. Stone, she said, quick question about your search results. Are you aware you're an active member of an LLC in Georgia? I told her yes, unfortunately, and started my usual speech about the family company that wouldn't release me, and she interrupted, politely, with the sentence that rearranged my year. The membership isn't the flag, ma'am, the activity is. Stone Family Holdings has UCC financing statements filed against it, recent ones. For those of you who've never had the pleasure, a UCC filing is what a lender records when a business pledges collateral. It's the public fingerprint of borrowing. My name was a 20% limb of a company that was actively, currently, pledging its body to a bank. And I hadn't signed, seen, or smelled any of it. The clerk read me the filing dates. The earliest was around the time of the Golden Shovel groundbreaking. The latest was fresh, months old. Whatever the Magnolia House was costing, Stone Family Holdings was helping pay for it, and Stone Family Holdings was still wearing my name. I got very calm, which people who know me have learned is my loudest alarm. I thanked her, hung up, and stood at my office window watching a pelican fail to land on a piling, and I thought about my mother at a post office counter pushing my name back across like a bad check. Twice I'd asked to be released. Twice ignored. I'd assumed it was spite, or laziness, or the general Stone allergy to admitting anything. Standing at that window, I finally ran the colder equation. You don't keep a name on a company for spite. Spite is free, And my mother never held a free asset in her life. You keep a name on a company because the name is worth something to somebody. I just couldn't see who yet. I closed on my broken beautiful house 8 days later. And I hired a lawyer before I hired a plumber. Patricia Vance practices out of a converted house in town with a shell driveway and a paralegal named Bernice, who runs the place like a destroyer. Patricia is 61, reads operating agreements for pleasure, and bills like she apologizes, rarely. I brought her my folder, the green certified mail receipt signed by my mother, the envelope stamped refused, the K-1s, the title company's notes on the UCC filings. She read for 20 minutes without speaking while I studied her diplomas and her taxidermied redfish. Then she looked up. The operating agreement is the problem. Membership withdrawal requires approval by 51% of membership interest. Your parents hold 80. You hold 20 and a mailbox. I asked what my options were. Today, we send a third demand on my letterhead with statutory language that makes it expensive to ignore. We put them on written notice that you disclaim any participation, any debts, any obligations. And then, Mira, we wait for them to make a mistake. Because people who ignore 2 letters make mistakes. She slid a legal pad across and had me write out the whole history, every date, every request, every refusal. When I finished, she read it and tapped the page with one finger. You kept the receipt from the post office, from years ago. Why? I told her the truth. I don't know how to not keep things. My whole life, keeping perfect records was how I proved I existed to people determined not to see me. Patricia looked at me over her glasses with something I couldn't name yet. Paper doesn't lie, people do, she said. Keep every receipt. One day the paper gets to talk. And it's the only witness your family can't charm. Her third letter went out certified on a Friday. The signature card came back. Same tidy hand. And then, for months, nothing. The call came at 1 a.m. on a number I didn't know, and I answered because coastal accountants answer storm season phones. It was Madison. 4 years of silence, and she opened with, "Did I wake you? I don't even care, honestly." She was drunk in that careful way, where every word gets placed like stemware. Behind her, I could hear a TV and my parents' wind chimes. So she was home, on the porch where we'd shelled peas as kids. She talked for 11 minutes, and I mostly listened, because you learn more from a monologue than an interview. She said running a business was like drowning in front of an audience that paid to watch. She said everyone who'd clapped at that dinner now called her with questions in their voices. Then she found the old knife. You know what your problem is, Mimi? Nobody ever expected one single thing from you. You got to be nothing. Lucky you. I watched the ceiling fan turn and understood, maybe for the first time, that the check on that table had been a sentence for her too. Just a different kind, the kind with an audience. And then her voice went small and flat, and she said the thing I'd known was under there my whole life. It was supposed to be me. It was always supposed to be me. I asked her gently what exactly was supposed to be her, and the question seemed to sober her half a degree, because she got quiet. When she spoke again, the smallness was gone, and something rehearsed had replaced it. Mom says when it all comes right, you owe us. She says either way, you owe... And then she stopped. Not trailed off. Stopped. Like a hand had closed over the phone. The line went dead. I lay awake until the gulls started. Owe them what? The Magnolia House didn't last 3 years. It died in the spring the way businesses die. Slowly, then all on one morning. Jenna sent the photo before 8. The gates chained and zip-tied to the iron scrollwork Madison had flown a man in from Savannah to design. A county notice. The kind with bold print. Delinquent taxes. Pending tax sale. Behind it, you could still see the white porch, string lights sagging like the party had aged 40 years overnight. 29% of businesses die from running out of cash, and I'd watched this one bleed for 2 years from 200 miles away. Being right about the math felt like nothing at all. That's a thing they don't tell you about being the family accountant. Madison moved back into my parents' house that same week. Into my old room, Jenna reported, because hers had become brand storage. Boxes of unsold Magnolia-branded candles where my bed used to be. But here's the part I need you to understand, because it's the hinge the rest of this story swings on. In Harlow, the story of the collapse got written that same month, and I wasn't there to check the ledger. The story went like this. Poor Madison. She dreamed so big. And the storms? And the economy? And meanwhile, her sister, sitting on her money down in Florida, wouldn't lift one finger for family. Jenna heard it at a baby shower. Aunt Lorraine heard it after church and, to her credit, argued. My mother never said it in the first person. She'd just tilt her head and let the town fill in the rest. She has always been fluent in implication. Within a month, a client of mine with Harlow relatives closed her account. No reason given. And that Monday, a bank envelope found its way to my name. It was waiting in the office mail between a supply catalog and a thank you card from Cecil the roofer.